Thank you everybody for coming this morning. Appreciate you being here. I'm really excited about our speaker today. For those of you that aren't in our class, this is a class on AI and social media and the meaning of life that we're doing. And we also have guest speakers that come in occasionally. And we're really excited to have Dean Josh Fershee here from the Creighton School of Law. So he's been a dean here at the law school for 5 years. Came to us from West Virginia, went to school undergrad for Michigan, went to Tulane, a good Catholic school for law school, and then did some other things before he ended up here at Creighton. So we're very grateful to you. And you can see that there's another partner with him in crime, and that's his wife, who also teaches in the law school. So they've both been doing a lot of research on this, and we're grateful for you to be here. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. And as we go through, if you have questions, I always say that you can interrupt me with questions and people don't, but I'm serious. You actually can ask questions if you have them as we go through, and I hope there are some. It's true, my wife teaches at the law school. Also, she teaches professional responsibility, which is the primary ethics course, a required course for all law students around the country. She teaches torts and criminal law and civil procedure and all sorts of other things. As she will say, her dean is difficult and asks her to do a lot of things. But also in the law and other parts of academia we attribute, and so some of this came from her work. She did a presentation on AI and ethics to the State Bar Association, or I should say the Omaha State Bar Association earlier this year. So I borrowed some of this from her and some others. We look at a few different things. So one of the places that we start is what is the legal profession? One of the things that you may not know, most of you, what's your interaction with the legal community? Where do you get your information about the law? Law and order?
Suits. Suits.
Suits? From a non-lawyer? There's a whole host of different practice areas, and this doesn't cover all of it, but I think it's important to have a sense of what lawyers do or what different lawyers do. So when you get a JD, you are and you pass the bar exam, and you're licensed in the state. I'm licensed in New York and DC. I'm not licensed in the state of Nebraska, so I can't technically practice law here. Although by the ethics rules, teaching in a law school is practice. And so there's some question whether I'm violating ethical rules, although that rule's been on the books for as long as the law school's been open, which is about 119 years, and there's never been a problem. So most of us not licensed in Nebraska feel pretty okay about that. But once you're licensed, if I'm licensed in New York, I can take any type of these cases. I can do any single kind of representation. Does it make me qualified to do that? At the very base level, maybe. But at a high level, no. When I was in New York, I practiced in mergers and acquisitions and some securities law work, and then I moved to Washington, D.C. I became a regulatory attorney. I did work in the energy sector, renewable energy, climate space. And so those are my areas. So should I handle a divorce? Absolutely not. But I can. I'm licensed to. Just like you don't want your dermatologist taking care of, a massive arm break, probably. Could they do it? Better than I can. But that's probably not where you start. And so as we look at the profession, you have all these different areas. You have criminal law, which is the one that we're most familiar with, the prosecution and defense of criminals, right? We have a right to an attorney in a criminal trial that is at least that can have jail time. We have transactional law. And so that's for things like contracts, mergers and acquisitions, might include real estate law, titles, that kind of thing. Very different practice, right? You don't have a whole lot of people who are practicing both of those, although in a small town you might have somebody who does do all of these things. That they work in rural practice, they have a much broader practice area. Trust and estates law, they do wills, they do probate. When somebody passes away, how does the things that they have move along? Family law, which is another one that people are often familiar with, rarely happy to be part of it, although if it's an adoption, that can be a very good thing. And divorce, of course, is a big part of that. Administrative law, which has become a bigger and bigger part of practice. And so it's not really litigation, it's before an administrative agency, and we see that in the energy space, the Food and Drug Administration, USDA, Social Security, a whole host of other areas. Any agency that you think of, a cabinet level agency, for example, and they have a counterpart at the state level, the Environmental Protection Agency, All of those are going to be more of an administrative practice, which is not quite litigation and it's not quite transactional. It's kind of a hybrid of the two. And then civil litigation, personal injury, medical malpractice, contract disputes, things that don't have criminal penalties. And you might have seen this, you think of high-profile cases. There might be a criminal lawsuit against somebody for sexual assault, for example, and then there might also be a civil suit, right? That's where the person who was harmed directly sues the person for a financial recovery. On the criminal side, they can face jail time and potentially fines. But those are two practices that come from the same incident. So we have this whole area of practice, and when we talk about what's AI going to do for this, well, any good lawyer will tell you it depends. And it depends on the space in which we're working. And it varies a lot depending on which space we're in. So we also need to define what is AI. It's artificial intelligence. It's kind of all of these things that we've been around. And in some form, in some way, it's been pervasive. The newer iteration is this concept of generative AI. But we've been using some version of artificial intelligence to help us since we got spell check on Microsoft Word. Before that, it was WordPerfect, which probably very few of you know about. And so, which there's still some people I work with who say it's the better product. I used to believe that. They're now wrong. But we have music apps that tell us what to listen to and make suggestions to us. We have, GPS is a great example, particularly, if you use Waze, for example, to pick a different route, or while you're driving along, it says, hey, by the way, you can save 10 minutes going if you change your path. Security systems, and of course, all hosts of computing. When you've talked about AI in your classes, what is your definition? Do you have a definition? Is there an operating definition for artificial intelligence?
Anyone?
Just like a large language model that takes in a bunch of data and kind of comes up with its own outputs from user inputs.
Okay, that's a great place to start. What's a large language model?
It's just like taking a bunch of different models and kind of combining them all together.
Okay, and so it depends on where we're pulling from, right? Our data set matters. The quality of our data set has a huge impact on how effective artificial intelligence can be, right? Is the internet our base? Is it a law firm's documents? One of the things, every law firm that I've ever been a part of, and I think anyone of any size, has a big document repository that has the documents that you've done for every single client ever. And so if you're a divorce firm, you've got all the settlement agreements, all the drafts, all the decrees. If you're doing litigation, you've got all the memos, all the briefs, places to start. When I was in energy practice, I could go and look. When we did a rate case to try and set rates, what did we do last time? How was this outlined? It's a starting point. In AI, if you can use all of that, you can put it together in ways that the old school version was I would type in, Chevron deference, and it would give me cases or briefs that we'd written in that space. Well, with a large language model, we might be able to say, write me a brief, here's my facts, give me a start on this brief. And so it can be more personalized. Can that save time? Potentially. Sure, we'll come back to that, but that's a big part of what we're looking at. But the inputs really, really matter. The quality of your large language model, the quality of the inputs, the algorithm that it's using to put things together is really important. Anybody hear about the New York, there's a famous New York case where a lawyer used AI for his brief. Anybody hear about that? So he filed a brief in the court, and it sounded right, and it said everything that he needed it to. And the court said, where are these cases from? We can't find them. And being a not super thoughtful lawyer, went back to AI and said, are these cases real? And they said, yep. And he went back and certified to the court, nope, those are all real. Suffice it to say, he's facing disciplinary action before the bar because all of the cases were made up. Can AI be, corrected with that? Can any lawyer doing what they're supposed to do figure that out? Absolutely. But one of the huge dangers of AI is we don't know what we don't know. So there he asked the question, are these cases real? It said, sure, right? That's the classic example of a hallucination, right? It's And this is because the way AI works, at least in most large language models, is that it's predicting what's the next best word based on everything else I've read. It is not speaking the language. It is putting together a puzzle based on the model that it has. And so it knows when I write a legal brief about a particular subject, I need a case. Cases look like this: last name versus last name. There's some numbers, it cites to a reporter, and gives a year. And so it does all of that. It just doesn't get it from a case. It just picks a last name. This sounds like a good one. This will be a good one on the other side of it. And so it creates this whole model. And one of the biggest challenges and one of the best parts that preserve the value of being a lawyer, at least in the near term, is that you have to know what you don't know. AI can help you, but it actually helps the more expert, not the less expert lawyer. Because you don't know if you're going down a bad path. And I've worked on it in the energy and environmental space, for example, and have it write things. And if it veers off into a space that isn't really in my comfort zone, I have to look all of it up. And if it's wrong, which it sometimes is, it actually takes me more time. And so there's ways that we can work with this, and as we get better and better, and we do better and better training, if I know what prompts to use, AI is more useful to me. I know how to narrow it, how to get rid of some of letting the model have the whole playing field when you learn how to narrow it. And so there's going to be a big part of that, and I'm sure you're all seeing that in other contexts, right? The quality of the prompt is really, really important. What's the follow-up question? How do I build on what I've asked of it? And so this is something that is going to continue to evolve. So this came about really in burst on the scene. And so it wasn't surprising that it was happening, but how fast it evolved and how fast it became readily accessible to people was a surprise to most. Most people didn't see this going there. And it can replicate some work, and it can do some really interesting things. And we'll take a look a little bit of what it actually looks like and what it can give you and what it can't in the legal context. So it can be really efficient in doing certain things. Give me a basic draft, especially if you know the space. If you know that it's not going off into left field. It can save costs. It can save person hours in what you're trying to do, and it can provide a starting point. The best thing, this is most useful for me, thank you notes. Trying not to write the same one over and over and over again. Here's the sentiment, can you help me rework this? It can be useful there. It's also really good at platitudes, you know, telling you things and talking in a little bit of a circular manner. I've let my students, I teach upper level courses, so when I teach environmental law, I let students do a draft brief, they do an outline, and then they can start it with AI. And what you find is that it's really bad writing most of the time. And it can be maybe corrected, but it's often very circular. It says things that sound like they mean something, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really give you very much content. But you can prompt it and work your way that way. Or if you have your inputs and start saying, okay, this is the case that I'm doing, you can use it to support you and get through some of the tedium. By the way, if you're not allowed to use it in class, don't. Right, follow the rules. And in our first year classes, we generally don't use AI, although we're doing some introductions and how you can use it to help you on research in particular. But in an upper level course, I'm trying to get students ready to go out into the world they're going to work in. And I want law students to have skills in this way, because a lot of times the best thing that we can offer young lawyers is a skill set that the people they work for don't have. Right? If they can go in with technical skills, whether it's, you know, building presentations, finding ways to present evidence, finding ways to be more efficient, that's a real value add. And so we're looking for ways to do that. So I want our students using it, but I also want you to be able to recognize when the writing's not good, when the product that it's given you isn't sufficient. In fact, is maybe really not good. Also, what do you have to do to fix it? There are no shortcuts to high quality work. Maybe that's an overstatement. There are no really, really good shortcuts to high quality work. At some point, you're going to put in the time and the thinking and the care to get it right.
Under cons, it mentions not human because it can't understand humor. Sometimes I will ask a LLM to tell me a joke and it's hilarious. Wondering if you have any thoughts about its ability to understand some of the subtleties of like human nature like that.
Most LLMs do not understand the subtlety. It's part of why it can be funny. It also doesn't have social norms. It's not afraid of offending you. True of a lot of comedians, I suppose. And so, but it can build in nuance and understanding what a joke is, for example, right? Everything, the basic comedy model is that almost all of it is something that you expect and one thing is blown out of proportion. That's what creates humor, right? That's fun. I just explained comedy, right? That's kind of what you get from AI. And so it's not to say that it can't do some things, and it's not to say that it can't write a nice letter, a sympathy letter, for example. It might be a good place to start. But it's not actually understanding it, right? It doesn't have context because it can't. And that's something that needs to come. But certainly, so it doesn't understand humor, right? Why is this funny? You're going to get a very clinical answer at best from that. Now, sometimes that's true for us. I don't know why it's funny. It just is. But I think one of the challenges for AI in every setting, whether you're working in accounting or working in a law firm, is going to be some level of a human element. We'll talk about that in a second in other contexts. But it's not to say that it can't create something that is kind or something that is funny or something that is really, really mean for that matter. But it doesn't know, in fact, that it's doing it. And so we're going to have to assess that, right? You get 5 jokes and you can say, I know which one's funnier, right? And so there's still going to be some level of that assessment. So as we think about this, for law firms, we think in litigation and transactional work. One of the big things that we do in litigation, for example, is something called document review, which if this were a room full of young lawyers, you would all shudder. Document review is going through all the documents. One of the first projects that I had when I got to New York City, working for a law firm, working for a big investment bank who had gotten themselves in trouble with the Securities and Exchange Commission. There was an investigation into this bank and some others for their stock traders. And one of the things, they believed they were doing what was called front running, which meant they were going to take a big trade. A client said, I want to sell 1 million shares of Nike stock. And what they would do is, on their own account, buy 1,000 shares of Nike, then buy 1 million shares for their client, which would make the price go up. And so they get the delta between where they bought and after the trade. And that's against the law because you're benefiting, using your client information to benefit yourself. And it in fact can, depending on how many shares you buy, increase the cost to your client. So they were trying to investigate all of this. We had to go through about 1.5 million emails before we turned them over to the SEC because as a lawyer, you never turn anything over to law enforcement or this version of administrative oversight without knowing what's in there. You're going to turn it all over. It is not that we can take it out, although you can look for stuff that's privileged because there's an attorney-client privilege, but that's really only going to be an email between general counsel and somebody. You can't just say, lots of people will send emails saying attorney-client privilege, and they're not even lawyers, so that's really not effective. But you can't just assert that. There's a test. But we'd be looking for it, so we pulled those out, but that was a very small number. But we wanted to know what was in there. We had to look at all of them and code them in various ways, including some that were what we would call hot. One that was might imply that somebody was doing a trade that they weren't supposed to. Or second, something that was going to probably offend the SEC, which we did find. There are lots of inappropriate pictures and videos and jokes and all sorts of things that didn't belong in work email, and maybe not anywhere, that we were going to have to turn over. And we wanted to make sure that you knew how to do it, because when you have a lot of really graphic and inappropriate things, it doesn't paint the best light for your client, even if it has nothing to do with illegal stock trading. But it does kind of paint a picture of somebody who's not to be trusted, right? So we want to know what's going on. Going through 1 million emails, even then, and this is 20 years ago when I started with that, we were using things to sort, trying to put documents and emails in a certain setting so that we could review them and be more efficient. Excuse me. And over the years, those programs have gotten better and better, and now with the advent of a more better language models and stronger AI tools, they can really help with that. But ultimately, we're still going to have to go back and at least have some eyeballs on this, because we can't just trust that it got it right. You have to know what you're handing over. We have ethical obligations as attorneys to know what I'm handing over, particularly to somebody who can have an enforcement action that could lead to a fine or even a loss of licensure, meaning a loss of your ability to earn a profession in that field, right? You don't want to turn something over without knowing it. It's there so that you can at least try to mitigate it and protect your client. But can it help us do that faster? Absolutely. Of course it can. And this is particularly true at super high level. So I worked at a very large law firm for very large clients. And so we were reviewing huge numbers of documents. When I moved in, that was in the litigation context. When I moved into transactional work, which was what I thought I wanted to do, mergers and acquisitions, you do a similar kind of document review called due diligence, which is reviewing all of the documents related to the company that you're going to purchase. So again, went and looked at, we were stuck in a room in Palo Alto reviewing 25,000 contracts that we needed to do in 36 hours. So a team of 4 of us, and we pulled the documents out, and we're looking for one thing. That's probably more than you need to know, but you're stuck with me, I'm a lawyer. Is that whenever you purchase something, most contracts have what's called a change in control provision, or they can have one. And that means that if you have a sales contract, for example, with a company, and it has a change in control provision, it says, if this company is sold or otherwise has a change in control, this contract is void or voidable or can be renegotiated. When you have a clause like that, it means, say, we've got 25,000 supply contracts. If all of those have a change in control provision like that, the company that purchases that as change in control could lose every single one of those contracts, or the value of every single one of those contracts by saying, we get to renegotiate, we'll pay you 25% less than what was there. So you need to know how to, that goes into valuation of the company. You can't miss those. And the thing that's particularly nefarious about this is, of the 25,000 contracts, maybe 150 had a change of control provision. They were usually the bigger ones, right? They were the people who had the market power. But it can fundamentally change your outcome. Can you trust that to AI? Maybe. We're not quite there yet. Because if you miss that, it could be $1 billion mistake, right? And these are the things that we're looking at. And so, can AI help us do that? Yes. Can it make me better? Can it do another run and say, is it there? Make sure I didn't miss anything, because there's still a risk of human error too. I could still miss something. And so they work together, but I'm not sure it's a substitute. Yeah, it can certainly narrow it down. And the beauty of AI, one of the things that's a big difference between AI and other search models, is that AI knows the difference between different kinds of language. There's an Economist article a while ago talking about being able to understand that the generative AI can understand the difference between saying the Jenkins case is overturned versus we file the Jenkins case into the dustbin of history. It knows in both cases it's saying that case is no longer relevant, it doesn't apply here. Older language models didn't necessarily pick up on that. And so, to your question before, is there some nuance? Yes, in that sense, because it does understand that language. And so there is more than what we've had before, and that is going to help us create new models and new tools.
So is there like a law-specific language model? Because I can't imagine you guys are sitting there uploading like 25,000 documents to chatgpt.com.
Well, that is correct, and there are lots of reasons why you can't. Not the least of which, as soon as you put any document as a lawyer into the public domain, you've just violated your client's confidences, right? Which is a huge problem and made that accessible. We've seen some of that. Even putting in your client facts into a ChatGPT, if it's identifiable in any way, it's out there in the model. It could pop up somewhere else. And in fact, there have been some stories of attorneys searching ChatGPT in areas to see like what the criminal defense team is trying to figure out. So there's a huge risk. So there are proprietary models. There's a firm called Allen & Overy, which is a big European firm. They have offices in New York and I think San Francisco. I think theirs is called Harvey, which is their system that's proprietary. Nexus and Westlaw, which are the big legal databases, work with law firms, and you can buy for a lot of money one that will work on your system and stay closed, where you can put your documents in and they can't be used elsewhere. So absolutely, and the bigger the firm, the more likely they are to have something like that. But again, I mean, any of those documents are usually on a system anyway, so some people worry about a data breach there. It's true, it's a concern, but it's true of all documents that are available on any cloud-based system, right? You can access them. So yes, it's so different, but what you won't have is two firms sharing those because they might have adverse clients. And so this is one of the things in the business people in the space love it, because each firm has to have it in some proprietary way. If you load your documents up into something, you need to know it's staying right there. And so each firm has to be very specific and focused, but it does change very much the quality of what your inputs are, right? If you have a big multinational firm with all sorts of different clients and different kinds of cases, you have a lot better language model than a smaller firm might have. And so there's a risk that AI creates a disproportionate advantage for large firms versus small firms. So as we look at this in criminal law, could we use it? Sure. All of the early models, they've done some testing, for example, for sentencing recommendations. It turns out virtually all AI models for criminal law are really, really racist. And it's not because they're actually racist. And it's not because the people who created them were racist. But when you have 250 some years of criminal law in the United States based on a system that has racist roots, and it does, right? That translates. It figures it out, and it replicates it. And that's problematic, right? That's a huge problem that we need to figure out how to control for. And part of it is because it's reading the data that it has, right? It's reading the data, and we look at all of these models that historically, until the 1970s, women couldn't get a credit card or a car loan without being co-signed by a spouse, a parent, or some other male in their family. That's not that long ago. That's in my lifetime. You can say that's really old, but nonetheless, not that old, right? And so that translates into our AI models. It influences how we read things and how we think about things, and we have to be really, really careful with that. In academia, does it have an impact? Sure. What does it have an impact? Just like you are doing writing for courses, we write for publications. Does it have an impact? Does it lower the quality of our writing? Does it increase the quality of our writing? Like in most cases, it depends. It depends on how we connect it. So as we look at other ethics issues, President Biden had an executive order looking to have an impact on all sorts of ethical areas of legal practice. There's international concerns, equity and inclusion, some of which I was just talking about, safety and security, both of data and other kinds of information, assuring trustworthiness, fraud prevention. AI could very easily help somebody commit fraud. There are questions of, ask AI, what's the best way to deceive a creditor? What's the best way to, run an eBay scam? There are ways that it can be used that are definitely problematic in how we do this. We have concerns about plagiarism. Is using AI plagiarism? What's plagiarism? Do we have a common understanding of what that is? What does it mean?
Passing off someone else's work as your own.
Okay. Is AI someone else's work?
Exactly called a person, but something else.
Okay, it's something else. Any argument that it's your work?
Well, it's technically just an amalgamation of everybody else's work,
Okay.
which
So-
could make it your work.
Well, arguably, how'd you get it?
Yes, but
Yeah.
I I think it can be original if you have skillfully engineered prompts. Like if you tell it creative to think about a problem creatively, it'll spit out something that's different than what a simple prompt would give out. So therefore, it is a creation of your own creativity, kind of.
Kind of, right? This is, arguably, right? I certainly agree that the prompts that you put in are your work, right? What you came up with to ask for is unquestionably your work. Is the output your work? Less clear to me. Is it somebody else's? Is it everybody's, right? Maybe, right? These are conversations, I mean, you know, lawyers love this stuff, right? We love to live in the gray.
Just recently, as recent as yesterday, the Wall Street Journal sued Perplexity for plagiarism, essentially, for not paying for scraping all of their content.
Yeah. And so it's using another's work to create, even if you're getting something at the end, it's using another's work to create your own. In the same way, if you pay somebody to write a paper for you, and then you punch it up and tweak it and make it look more like what your professor specifically was looking for, it's not your work, right? You did some work on it. But our plagiarism standards depend on which one you look at. Some say it's the work of another, and there are people who say this is not the work of another person. It's just not. It may be looking and taking from other people's stuff, but it's not another person's work. Or is the essence of plagiarism passing off work as your own that is not? Which I would argue is probably a better way to think about plagiarism, right? In that case, we know. But it does still get blurred. Do you get to use Google? I use Westlaw or Lexis to find legal cases. I have to do that. I need that help. And it's no different using Westlaw than when I first started, we were taught to use the books. That's where all the cases were. It was kind of an exercise in making us do what other people did because you were never going to use the books because the database was more up to date than the books were in most cases. So you're going to use other inputs to create any research paper, certainly. And so you need to be able to. And so as we think about what does this mean for plagiarism, but if you can just ask it and it gives you all of the information, creates other problems. When we provide legal advice, does anybody know what a pro se litigant is? Right, a pro se litigant is somebody who represents themselves. So you have the right to represent yourself in most lawsuits. You cannot represent your spouse or your brother or your parents until you get licensed as a lawyer. But I said I'm not licensed in Nebraska, but I could sue my neighbor. I don't want to. But I can do that, and so can you. That's what's called a pro se litigant. It's an unrepresented or somebody who's representing themselves. They can rely on very bad legal information. This is true just by using Google, by the way. AI didn't invent bad legal takes. Twitter, I think, did that. But there's a way for, the idea is that this could make it better for pro se litigants. In many ways, it's actually made it worse because they think they know what they're arguing, rather than going in and arguing just on the merits of what they know to be true. They're trying to make it legal and in many cases failing miserably. And so it creates this tension. And it can have impact on other transactional documents. So for example, you can go to the internet, or you can, and it's going to be more tailored, to find a sample will or power of attorney. But if you go to AI, it's going to be more tailored. You can have it put in your name, and put in your address, and put in the things that you want there. But there's a lot that you might not know that is a problem. So for example, in some states, it needs to be signed. In other states, a holographic will, one that you write it down, and there's no question that it was yours, it's good. The court will accept it. Other places want a witness and a notary. And you wouldn't know the difference. Did you create something of value or not? This is not new to AI. Has anybody heard of LegalZoom? It creates all sorts of documents. It can be useful, but again, you don't know what you don't know. And most people who are doing big transactions are still going to law firms because they aren't willing to trust that LegalZoom is going to actually get them the purchase or get to the outcome of what they expect. Any of you have one of these? So when we talk about AI fundamentally changing the legal profession, when these were coming out, well, first of all, 25 years ago, nobody thought that you could do what you can do with this, right? You can create movies. I can look up and access virtually any legal case that's been recorded ever. And I can do it from a courtroom, although you usually can't have your phones out in the courtroom. So that could get you in trouble. But you go outside the courtroom and look it up. That was something that was unthinkable not that long ago. Has it changed the profession? Sure. What's the biggest impact the phone has had on the work world?
Never being disconnected.
Yeah, you can work all the time. That's really what most lawyers have found out so far. You can't get away from it. Is that a plus? Can be to clients. Certainly to somebody who wants you to bill hours. But for our mental health, maybe not. Right? It can keep it with you at all times. Now, by the same token, it can be really beneficial. Right? I can go to my daughter's track meet and not worry. I can be there and do whatever I need to and reply to somebody. I can get an email in a way that I couldn't do not that long ago. And I can be present, although how present is an open question, right, when you're looking at your screen. But this has not fundamentally changed the basics of the practice of law. And I think that gives some reason to believe that at least the AIs that we're working with are not going to either. For a variety of reasons. We talked about criminal law. You're not going to, that is always going to have people involved. It necessarily has people involved. Criminal law is one of the most important and one of the most dangerous things we do in a government, right? You deprive people of their rights. That may be warranted. It may be necessary for public safety, but you want to get that right. And we already have enough challenges. Do we want to let that go without some level of review? Of course not. When we look at the divorce context, there's a law firm in town that has online divorce. You can go on and sign up to, it has to be amicable, both parties have to agree. Some states don't allow that, Nebraska does. Where you can go through the process after you've had your necessary separation and the things that you need to trigger your ability to have a divorce, where you can go through step by step, it asks you all the questions to lead you to a document. And the law firm loves it, even though they provide access to it for a very low fee. Why? Because as soon as somebody starts using it, they almost always end up saying, I need a lawyer. I need to talk to somebody. And they can do it in varying ways. Some people, they just need a little bit of a consultation. And so they only pay for that small part. So it creates access opportunities for people to get better representation than they would if they did it on their own without spending $40,000 on their divorce. For other people, they realize we don't want to do it this way. We want somebody involved and taking us through the whole process so that we get it right. We're talking about custody, we're talking about our children, we're talking about who's going to be with whom and where and how we're going to take care of them if something happens to one of us. Right? It becomes very, very personal, and in some ways that AI type, it's a program of sorts, actually has the impact of triggering for people the need for human contact. It sets them down a path when they start realizing, I need more interaction. And so I think as we think about how legal practice is going to evolve, I think we will see more of that. The ability to start down a path, to start your sale of your home, to start your sale of your business, of your family farm in an online environment where you can get some resources. One of the big things about the legal profession is right now we have a huge access to justice problem. When I talk about pro se litigants, we're talking often about landlord-tenant disputes. People who are being evicted or arguing with their landlord, and they're not represented. We have a legal clinic at the law school that actually is helping with some of those cases, but we can't help everybody who needs help. And so is there a way that we can create access to justice in those ways? I think so. Rural areas have a huge lack of attorneys. There are 3 counties in Nebraska that do not have an attorney. They had 3 jobs in western Nebraska that were posted for a public defender or a prosecutor that did not get a single applicant. And the job pays more than it does in Omaha to be in Scotts Bluff. But people don't want to go there. Some people do. Not slamming on Scotts Bluff. But it creates a challenge. So are there ways that this can help facilitate that? Or for jobs that it replaces by making things more efficient, does that free up lawyers to work on these other kinds of cases where people are represented? It's going to require us to look at new models. How do we compensate lawyers for doing those services? We're already looking at that. But we actually don't have enough lawyers, and it's not close. I recognize that that's probably self-serving coming from the dean of a law school, but it's true. But where they are and what they're doing is not maximizing access to justice and access to services that people need. And so it's my hope that AI can facilitate that. But there's a risk that it actually exacerbates it, that it makes it easier for the big firms and the haves to do more, and everybody else gets less. And so that's going to be one of the big challenges.
Do you think it's going to cause problems with entry-level jobs and like finding a starting place?
That is my biggest concern. The entry-level job, because as I mentioned, when we talk about AI really helping you, it's knowing what you don't know that allows that to really help you. And so can it replace a first-year associate who doesn't know that much? Maybe. But the worst part about it is the process. So when I started in the energy space, one of our clients was a big energy company on the East Coast. And I was very fortunate. They compensated us. I did work before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And my job was to listen to they had hearings every Wednesday. I would go to the hearings, and sometimes I could watch them on closed circuit TV. But look at what the docket was, listen to the cases, the outcomes that they had, and then report back. These are the things that we think might influence your decision. Or that this is, the partners I worked for would say, we're looking for these kind of cases, maybe these are the ones to look most closely at, then I'd write up a summary and send them to the client for review. That was a fantastic way for me to learn the space. If AI can do that for me, it's very efficient for the client, they get the information that they need, but I'm not learning. Right? I did that for 3 months and was able to do things that I didn't think, to understand concepts that I had no idea of. And so that's a huge risk. I think that's going to be the biggest challenge. One of the biggest challenges I have right now for young attorneys is that law firms want to hire a third-year associate. I haven't figured out how to graduate third-year associates. Right? It's because they want people who have learned in that environment how to, what the basics of practice are. Our clinical experience does a better job of that because those students have actually had cases they might have argued before in court. They've done the documents, so that's a place we're looking. But that's the risk. Particularly, like the firms that I was working at were very large with very sophisticated practices, and the learning timeline is long. And if you take out the learning that lower level associates have, you end up with very high level work and nothing down here. That's a huge risk for the legal profession too. We already have that, and that's one of the biggest challenges in the rural parts of the country, western Iowa, western Nebraska, significant parts of Utah. The average age of a lawyer in rural America is in the 60s. And people aren't taking over their practices, so you're losing all this institutional knowledge, all this understanding of the community and who they're serving and how they do it, and nobody to step in. So we already have that problem, and this could make that worse. I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges both for law schools and for law firms in the legal profession of figuring out how do we do that. How do we move you from an entry-level attorney who has enough expertise to go on your own? Now the flip side is that AI can also help solo practitioners. What's a solo practitioner? Me hanging out a shingle. Right, and we have some students. They graduate, they pass the bar, they don't have a job. They're going to create a website, get a little office space, and they start working. And you can do that. And AI and these other search engines and Lexis and Westlaw, if they can figure out how to afford them, might be able to facilitate them actually taking on more cases and working on their own. And so we may see this really big firm and really small firm, and really that it might kind of get rid of the mid-sized firm, or see a dwindling of that and more solo practitioners and people kind of doing things on their own because they can get some level of kind of administrative support for themselves through AI. I think that's going to be the biggest question. The other part is that we also see where people work changes constantly. We have a lot of lawyers in Omaha getting hired by East Coast and West Coast firms, Chicago firms. Some of the Chicago firms will come to one of our firms, to come to an associate here and say, I'll pay you Chicago prices and you can stay in Omaha. Most of the work's being done remotely. Right? That's not really an AI creation, but it does facilitate it and it can expand it. But the reality is there's so much legal work right now that there's so much more to be done. We need to figure out how to have AI help us get that done. I don't think that's going to, right now we don't have enough lawyers to get the work done that needs to be done, but we're not getting people in the right places. So one of the questions is, can AI help us get there? So I want to talk a little bit about how it impacts the practice of law, right? So client confidentiality, I mentioned before, that's a huge part of what it is. You notice that I didn't tell you any of my clients that I worked for. I can tell you I worked for a big investment bank or a large energy company. I actually can tell you who those are because I won't tell you who the investment bank was, but the energy company was Dominion, and I'm on public filings, and so that is an okay thing to disclose. But as a general matter, you don't disclose who your client is. You certainly don't without permission of the client. And that's just the name of the client, right? You should not know who my clients are unless I have specific permission to share it. Sometimes that's implied, right? If I go to a press conference for my client, I'm a spokesperson. You're going to figure out pretty quickly who I'm representing. But confidentiality matters, starting with the client, and then all of their documents, all of the things that they tell you, need to be kept confidential. AI, especially early on, had a lot of people dumping those hundreds of documents in to see what they could get out of it. Make this more efficient for me, and you just put all of that out into the world. That's a huge problem. It is an ethical violation if somebody catches that happened. And it's really hard to strip all of the confidential information you have from any complex problem. And you can think of from the smallest, shoplifting case or a divorce situation to a really big, merger or sale of a big company. When we talk about competency, though, there's this evolution. Right now, I gave you the example of the New York lawyer who basically showed his incompetence by filing with the court a made-up brief. There will come a time, and there are spaces even where it's already happening, where you might not be competently representing your client by not using AI. That is, I know my spaces quite well. It doesn't mean I didn't miss something. And so it might require, at some point that we go into AI, what am I missing in this claim? What else should I be arguing, or could I argue? And then I'd have to assess it and see where it is. But you might miss things by not asking the question, really simply, of AI. What is this argument? What should I be saying? Sometimes we have 5 counts, but maybe there's 10. Or what's my defense in a certain context? And so it raises this question, and it becomes a challenge, obviously, if you don't check your own work, but that can work in both ways. I finished the brief, I should run it through. Going back to that New York lawyer, by the way, every lawyer who's ever been taught in law school has been taught before they file a brief to check if the cases are good law. That is, was the case overruled or distinguished in some case, so you can address it. You never file a brief without checking that. You go into Westlaw or Lexis and it has a whole thing. You can put your document in there and say, and it will pull out. These are the cases. It'll give you a yellow flag. This might have been distinguished. Red flag. That case has been overturned. Sometimes it's on another issue, so it doesn't matter. But you need to know. It takes 3 minutes tops. Now, if you find that there's problems, you might take longer than that to fix it. But those lawyers would have known within a minute that they had bad law. And so that was a competency issue that was not created by AI, other than it created a sense of confidence that they should not have had. Right? They were trusting in this amazing technology that it was going to change their world, and it did, but not in the way that they were hoping. It was really a problem. And finally, the scope of authority. One of the questions for when we look at scope of authority, lawyers have an obligation to represent their clients. Lawyers determine the means by which they represent their clients, but clients determine the ends. So that is, if I'm representing any of you, and we have an injury case, you know, you got hurt in a car accident, and you said, I won't settle for less than $1 million. And the client offers, and the insurance company offers me $10,000. I still have to come to you and say they've offered settlement of $10,000. And you can say, I said $1 million and I mean it. Fine. But I have to present that to you because you decide, not me, whether you're settled. It is your offer. I have to present it to you. You get into some murky areas where you say, don't bring me anything less than $1 million. Most lawyers are still going to say, I know you don't want to see it, but I feel like I need to tell you it's out there. Because you run the risk if you go litigation and nothing happens, you say, I would have taken $10,000. The client decides. A plea deal. Well, I accept, you know, you've been offered, somebody is charged with burglary, and I can't accept a plea deal, and they say, look, just do probation, we won't do jail time, we'll drop it. I can't say it's a deal. Client has to accept that. Now, the prosecutor knows that too, right? It's not so. But I can't refuse it either. I have to bring to you, if they offered you 4 years in prison, that's an absurd thing. Somebody might want the option to take it. It's the client's job. With AI, it blurs a little bit what is the means and what are the ends as to how we represent clients. There's a risk there, particularly as to the means. The client says, I want you to use AI to write my defense or to write my contract. Well, historically, you don't get to tell me how I do my job. I get to do the job for you because I'm trained. Or you can't use AI. I don't want any of those computers touching my work. Is it malpractice for me not to use it, right? And so we end up with some potential tensions, particularly as this evolves. So where do we end up? Is it going to reform legal practice? I think to some degree it will. As you identified correctly, particularly the entry-level process of how attorneys work. Now there's other places that attorneys can get those experiences. One of the best things that best experiences for a number of our law students is to go clerk for a judge, where they help the judge write opinions, they help the judge do research, they manage the docket, they might have conversations with the lawyers on small things and scheduling matters. It's a fantastic way to learn. And that's a space where, at least under the current system, it's going to operate how it has. But there's not enough clerkships for every person to do those. Are there ways to expand that? Maybe. Is it going to change the billable hour? I think it might have this on the next slide too. But how we bill. Traditionally, lawyers bill by the hour. Actually, we bill by the 6-minute increments. Most lawyers who go to work in-house for a client or go into academia, the number one thing they were happy to give up, billable hours. Because you have to account for all of your time. But it can be very expensive. And so when I left practice 20 years ago, I was billing at $450 an hour, which is an absurd rate for a young attorney, quite frankly. Those attorneys are approaching $800,000 an hour. So are there efficiencies to be had? Sure. And one of the things that AI is starting to push towards is rather than working by billable hours, there will be some spaces in which we'll start billing by the task. This is what it will cost you. We've seen some evolution of that, and some small firms have done that. I will do your basic will for $250. We can do a basic simple divorce for $3,500 or whatever, rather than billing by the hour. But this is going to accelerate that. Because the trade-off is that the particularly strong AI models are very, very expensive. And clients are going to have to pay for that one way or another. And the big clients understand that. They want to pay less. We all do. But that's going to have to be managed. And so I think it is going to have a structural impact on how we look at billing and how we operate. I think there's a chance that we will start looking at different models. Historically, you can't have a corporation that, you know, you go to Walmart, you can get your taxes done, you can get your glasses made, you can't get your divorce taken care of. Part of that is the structure. You cannot have corporate ownership where it's a salaried employee. Your lawyer represents you directly, which is right in terms of trying to protect people. That's how we protect against malpractice. It's the same with doctors in certain contexts, right? We're responsible for our work, but we can maintain that in other settings. And so I think we might start seeing an evolution that way too. And so that you can start having more access. Are law schools changing? We already are. Unquestionably, this has become part of what we're looking at. We've done courses in e-discovery, how you use electronic to discover documents, discover things that you need to know. We're looking at expanding AI in various places, and we're trying to figure out how you can connect the use of AI to high quality writing. Because one of the things that is a huge risk is if you let AI do the bulk of the writing, you don't necessarily know how to. And one of the big challenges in most legal cases, people don't come to us if you can Google or chat GPT the answer. They really don't. And so that's a big challenge of what we see moving forward. So we have to apply to that, and ethics rules. How are we going to look at it? There are some states that are saying using AI is not permissible. Most have backed off of that. And now they're saying you have to use it in a competent manner, which is consistent with the rules. But it's starting to add that, and we see that in law schools and universities. Do we redefine plagiarism? Do we redefine what it means to do your own work? And so, went back to these parts of the profession we talked about earlier, and I don't see it impacting criminal law a whole lot. There's a process there. It might help with filing of paperwork and that kind of thing, but people have to sign off on it. There's individuals who have to make decisions. The prosecutor makes the charge. The defending attorney is going to work with the client to decide how they proceed. For transaction law, it can have a huge impact on how we do drafts and how we do document review. It can definitely save time there. Trust and estates law, I don't think it changes it a whole lot because it's been changed. For the people who are looking to work with lawyers to do those documents, they're already using them. For the people who are using smaller ones, smaller scale ones that can use LegalZoom already are. I don't see AI changing that a whole lot. It might make LegalZoom and the other options better. I hope that it does. And maybe more people will use that weren't going to attorneys, but it's not going to have a very big impact. People care about their money, and they're not going to trust it to a computer very often, at least not when it's big money. Family law, I mentioned that earlier, kind of how it can help facilitate it, but I think you still need those connections. I think there's some big opportunities in administrative law. There may be some ways to do that, particularly in tracking enforcement and how we do things. But it might make us more efficient because virtually all of our federal agencies have a backlog. It's not that there isn't enough work, it's that there isn't enough time. And so if this can facilitate it, I think it could make things better, but I don't think that changes a whole lot of the jobs. Number of jobs. It might change how you do it. And finally, with civil litigation, similarly, hopefully it will help pro se litigants, people who can't afford representation, but it's going to take time because it often sends people down a bad path, or a wrong path, I should say. So it really could help small firms compete. I mentioned this earlier. I think that big firms right now already have a big advantage in terms of resources and access to information. One of the big things that and you might have seen it in some movies, one of the ways you say you want some documents, I'll send you all the documents. Right? Probably the best legal movie ever made, My Cousin Vinny. If you've seen that, it's actually one of the most accurate ones, sadly enough. That and The Verdict, which is a lot more sad and a lot less fun. That, you know, you ask for some documents and they overwhelm you. You know, big firm can fill this room with all the documents. And if you've got one person, there's no way you can get through them. And that's one of the ways big firms and big companies can flex their muscle on the little person who's trying to have an action. And so there may be ways in which this can help facilitate that. Can you call through this information, at least in a way to give you a fighting chance in a way that you couldn't before? And so I think there's some opportunity there, and I think we talked about the rest of those. So finally, I think it's going to change the legal profession, but it's hard to know exactly how. In the same way how phones have changed how we interact, how we do business in other contexts, how it changed how we practice law. I mean, when I started practicing Washington, D.C. energy work, you had to file something at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission by 5 o'clock, physically, walking in and get it filed. As soon as you could electronically file, it changed everything. Fortunately, they kept the 5 p.m. deadline. Right, so you could stay at work later, but you were filing it for the next day. What it did eliminate, I had a fantastic paralegal named Neil, who if he was running late, knew the door knock at the back of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to get something filed at 5:15. Pays to have good people. And that stuff is gone. And maybe rightly so. Right? Maybe it shouldn't be able to be filed because of who you know. Now, these were not high stakes. They were high dollar, but not high stakes things, right? This is about filing for a natural gas pipeline or a renewable energy facility. But nonetheless, it changes the practice, but I don't know how it does too much else. So one other thing I was going to show you quickly, if I can make the internet work, and we'll see what we get. This is the danger. So we're going live, and I don't know what I'm going to get by going here, but one of the examples, I want to try ChatGPT. All right, so all right, Chevron deference is an administrative law concept. It's been on the books since the Reagan administration. This is a basic concept of how we analyze agency decisions. This was overturned last year. Chevron deference is not really a thing. It doesn't tell you that. So for an older lawyer who understands administrative law but wasn't really paying attention, you might try to go through this whole process. It didn't tell you it's there. And so you can ask, is it still considered good law? No, it's not. That is absolutely not true. That was true about 5 months ago. And so one of the challenges you have with a large language model is what's the end date? We used a different one in my environmental law class for a case we were reading and asked it to summarize the case. What's the standing? Where are we? And it said something really interesting at the end. As of 2021, this is still good law. That too had been changed in January of 2024. And so this is one of the limits, the time frame, the temporal nature of this, and particularly the legal profession. You've got to know a lot, even just to ask, is this still good? Right? This is all accurate, except that now it's changed. Those legal scholars saying that you should limit or overturn it, Neil Gorsuch, did it. Right? And so we end up in this spot where there's real danger because you don't know what you don't know. Are there other places to search this? Absolutely, but a lawyer would go to Westlaw and pull up the Chevron case, and then it would be, there's what's called key sites, and LexisNexis calls it shepherdizing, I think, that runs through the different cases and will tell you, these are all the cases that have mentioned it, this is the most recent one, and it will be labeled overturned. And so this is why I'm not super worried about it changing us, but this will be better next month. This will have it. I write in the area of business law and energy law. I wrote an article recently. Anybody know what an LLC is? Right. It's a limited liability company. A significant number of courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, periodically like to call it a limited liability corporation. A corporation is a different entity than an LLC. I never miss a chance to tell people that. An article specifically about that just came out. And when we started, and it's in my article that I wrote with the co-authors at Penn State, she asked ChatGPT and a couple others, what is a limited liability corporation? It gave the description of what a limited liability company is. And then she said, she asked, what is a limited liability corporation? Then she said, what is a limited liability company? And ChatGPT said, I'm sorry, the answer I gave you before was wrong. I gave you the answer for a limited liability company, which is distinct from a limited liability corporation, which is really just a corporation. And they're two separate bodies of law that have overlap and they're often confused, but they are separate. But you had to ask. I'll tell you, I put that in. Now, it will tell you it is not a corporation. This is something, part of the reason we wrote the article was to get that article and that language into these language models to try and get courts to stop calling LLCs corporations. This seems to, I'm not going to say we had the only effect on that, but asking that question on a regular basis is actually having an impact and can improve the quality of this and therefore the law, hopefully. But you got to know what you don't know. And so I think that's the really big challenge. So with that, I'll take any questions if you have any, but I appreciate your time and enjoyed spending time with you guys.
We do have a little time for questions, if somebody has a question.
And you can ask me law school questions generally, if you're interested in anything like that.
It sounds like if AI becomes widespread in law, then human judgment will be at a premium. Do you think that'll make earning a law degree harder or easier in the future?
I think earning a law degree is going to be very similar. I think that I think it's going to, it makes me wonder whether we're going to start specializing more. Like right now, I mentioned at the start, I have a JD and I can do all of the law. Right? Whatever it is I'm licensed, I can do all of the things. I wonder if we're going to have to start specializing more so that you have judgment and that I can put somebody out at graduation who's really steeped in commercial law or criminal law or whatever, that's really what they do, and maybe they don't know some of the other things that we would traditionally make them learn so that they can have that judgment. I think that's a place we might see an evolution of really focusing on that. We're going to have to think about how we get people in a position to exercise that judgment, because that's the biggest challenge. Google already provided you some okay answers to a lot of these questions. Right? What are the rules about my property line? Do I own the fence or does my neighbor? Right? Those kinds of questions, and so I think it's going to evolve, and I don't know that it will make it easier. One of the big challenges and the real benefit, so law school's job is not actually historically, has not been to teach you the law. We teach you enough of the law to be what we call, have lawyer literacy. I need to understand basics of contracts and torts and criminal law and evidence, all of those things so that I can go out and learn myself. Most of the cases, I didn't take an energy law course. I have an energy law casebook. Right? I had to learn that somewhere else. What you're really given in law school is the ability to go research something, research the law, get to an answer, and know what the outcome should be, or what the likely range of outcomes are, probably better said. That's something that you're still going to need. And this is the biggest challenge with a lot of what AI dumps out for you. You have to know where to go look. How do I verify that this is in fact true? What's a real source? What's a legitimate source? And at least right now, you can't ask AI what its source is. Now, sometimes you can. It might give you a website. I pulled this. I asked for an employee handbook. Where did you get that? I got it from this site. So you can go to that and look at, does this match with what they said, and is this okay? So I think those research skills are going to evolve, but it is going to be about how do you verify whether this is accurate? And that's really what law school's always been. How do you figure out what the challenge that's been brought to you is? And it's almost always in some very, it may not be a fundamentally new area of the law, but it's happening in a different way than it happened to other people. And lawyers say, well, these cases that came out for the plaintiff, these cases came out for the defendant, how are they similar, how are they different, and you make the argument. And the court decides on a new one. Because if it's on all fours with a case that's in your jurisdiction, you're done. right? You just tell the client, or they may have figured out, oh, I lose. Or I win and I'm suing to enforce the judgment. Or I'm suing somebody that doesn't have any money, what are my other paths to recovery? Right, you need to find those. So it's going to evolve it some, but I don't think it changes the overall view of what you need to do as a lawyer.
Is this gonna make better lawyers richer? In the sense of, you come back over and again to, you have to know what you don't know. And that's what I mean by better lawyers are better at doing that. So that's gonna be at an increasing premium, I would think. Therefore, making more competition and,
So I think it has the ability to benefit highly specialized lawyers, you know, with particular skill sets more than others. Although that's already true, right? The really top lawyers have all the business they need, and if this can help them take on more clients, which maybe it could, then it could make them even richer, right? Because they can handle more cases. It is my expectation that it will help at the top, but also hopefully help at the bottom. And I don't mean of not good lawyers, but of smaller lawyers working with, you know, less experience and less time, that it can kind of level the playing field, at least to some degree, and give them an opportunity. But I think that the extremes at the top are not really where this happens. It's kind of the 75% lawyer who have resources. I think it might benefit them. I mean, 75% in terms of kind of the type of business that they're running, and the, you know, not multinational billion-dollar corporations, but $25 to $50 million companies, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So there's been like a recent switch in accounting firms hiring more like BIA graduates than actual accounting graduates. So I wonder if there will be a similar thing in the law field where law firms are hiring maybe more tech-oriented, like tradesmen than actual lawyers. Do you think that would ever happen or not?
So law firms have expanded in their tech spaces, although most of the time it's about cybersecurity. That's their biggest concern and where those tech folks are going. Unlike in the accounting space, and I don't know that space quite as well, I admit, but for lawyers, there's work that only lawyers can do. That is, you need to be licensed to be able to do it. And so I don't think that I think you will see an increase in the number of tech people firms continue to hire. And maybe on the margins that will impact the number of lawyers that they have. But somebody's going to have to review that work. Everything that happens, part of the ethical rules as a lawyer, something goes out under a licensed attorney's name, and I need to be able to verify it. If my name's on it, it's mine. It doesn't matter who wrote it, whether AI generated it, whether some tech folks helped me get it, I am certifying it. And so I think there's going to be a continuing reluctance there, but maybe. I mean, that's the other question, are we going to start seeing more highly tech educated young lawyers, right? Is that going to be your advantage? Is that how you come in with a degree in technology and law? That maybe that's the space that you can fill. Right? So I think that's a fair question. I'm more worried about it. I said it when we started. I'd be more worried about it as an accountant than as a lawyer in the near term, about where those jobs are going to go, because of the judgment that's needed and the personal nature. But not in any way suggesting that lawyers are going to be immune from this. That is not true.
Good. Well, thank you so
Thanks,
much again.